Welcome to the Eureka Next podcast, where we bring insight and inspiration to the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Nick Callens, and today our guest is professional sailor Christophe Killian. Christophe has been the champion of several prestigious globally ranked regattas, including Gov Cup, National College Championships, and was ranked #1 match race sailor in the U.S. and 12th in the world. Christophe, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. Hopefully I can give some good insights.
Cool. So knowing what you know now, what would you tell your 18-year-old self being a successful professional sailor and campaigner?
Yeah, so when I was an 18-year-old, I was kind of like, I was starting to get pretty good at sailing, starting to understand it a lot. But I don't think I quite understood how to really just get better at something in general. Even though I was getting better at sailing, is because I was spending time doing it, and I was kind of relying on luck sometimes. Right. I would be like leveraging myself out, like taking risks and being like, ooh, if I get lucky here, though, I'm going to win. But if I get unlucky, I would lose or something like that. And I wish I would have relied more on the skills I had already built up, and relied more on, like, it's hard without getting into too much of the specifics of sailing, but relied more on my boat handling, like the physical aspect, rather than some of the mental aspects, which kind of come with time and experience. I wish I would have relied more on that rather than the luck aspect, because I would take flyers, I would take gambles to try and win.
Separate from the fleet.
Yeah, exactly. Separate from the pack, get away and take your own risks. But in hindsight, sometimes it worked out, but sometimes it definitely didn't work out. And I'd say it didn't work out more often than it did. And I think I could have had a better overall average had I relied on my more consistent skills rather than taking the risks. Where other people maybe were more comfortable taking those risks, maybe they knew a little bit more than I did, but maybe I was a little bit better at other things than they were, and I should have taken advantage of those rather than trying to match them, and kind of playing my own game more. Yeah. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So you tried to go for first place instead of settling for second place, or third place, third place. So you tried to take the risk to get the #1.
Yeah. And then coming through college, you realize, like, to win a college national championship, the guy who wins averages, so there's 20 teams, right, at a college national championship or something like that, 20 or 18. And basically you have to average 4th or 5th place out of those 18 boats to win the whole thing. You don't have to average 1st or 2nd by any means. Usually people get 1st and then like a 10th or something like that. It's really hard to be consistent. So if you can just be like that 2nd or 3rd place guy every time, never sending the big risk to win the race, but never to lose the race, then you end up coming out on top on average if you do it more often. And that's, that's what's really worth it in athletics. Like, you have to prove yourself time and time again, not just like once or twice, You
gotta space it out.
Yeah.
And what drove/motivated you to pursue your passion?
So sailing, for me, it was hard for a while because I was brought into it at such a young age. I started sailing when I was like 4, something like that. And so I kind of got burnt out of it a little bit when I was 13, 14. And because I was so intense about it, my family was always pretty intense about it. And, it was working and I was getting better at it. But I started to get burnt out. Yeah. And what helped me, like, press through that and carry on was, like, going into high school sailing, actually having like a little bit of fun. Like, I was always doing the really intense version of the sport. And then high school style sailing was like, a bunch of friends, a big group of people, not just like you and a partner training aggressively. And that brought me back into the sport. And that drove me to, like, it gave me a new wind. I'm like, okay, I enjoy this again. I can do it again, So it's always important when you feel like stalled out in the sport to start having fun with it, and I've always tried to do that throughout my whole sailing career. Is like, whenever I'm not having fun, kind of take a step back, maybe like go into a different side of sailing, maybe the more fun side, like speedy stuff, like instead of racy stuff, and try to re-enjoy it. And then it lets me get back into the other side again,
Yeah. And if you could have a discussion with anyone in the world, living or dead, who would that be?
Yeah. So that's always such a good question. I have like a few answers, I guess, kind of. One person is Nikola Tesla. Like, he's a guy I want to talk to for a different reason than I guess most people. I want to know what drove him, because he never became famous, like, or at least in his time, right? Like, he wasn't famous then. He wasn't rich. He wasn't like anything. So like, I just kind of wondered. He didn't try to be either, it seemed, So I kind of wonder why he did all the amazing things that he did, even though he like didn't seem to care what anybody else thought. And that seemed to be the driving factor in most famous people's lives, For instance, like Edison, like his counterpart, was like all about the fame and like the being known and like all that stuff. And Nikola he invented the really, really cool stuff and didn't really care what people thought, So I'm curious why.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. I mean, you just don't know. He's did all this incredible stuff, and it's like, for what?
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, because what drives like people like normal people. It's like either like money, fame, fortune, whatever. Tons of things can drive you, but his is fairly confusing. Like I've never really understood why. Yeah. And he's really successful and like was the best at what he did. Yeah. So he must have had some weird driving factor, like something like underlying.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
And going back to what you said earlier, if you were to start sailing at an older age as opposed to a very young age, do you think you could have gotten to the success you did?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I believe like from my sailing, and now that I'm a coach as well, and I teach other people how to sail, and especially over the last couple of years I've been doing that, I've seen a few kids who didn't sail growing up and they just wanted it bad and then sailed 7 days a week, like with like totally random people by themselves, whatever. And they got as good as the kids who'd been doing it since they were 6.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's necessarily how young you start, but I do think the number of hours that you spend doing it does matter.
Yeah.
But you can catch up. Like if you start late, if you just spend an extra couple hours a day or a couple extra days doing it, then the next person, you'll catch up and you'll do it the same way. It's more of an hours total rather than when you started. Have you ever heard of like the 10,000 hour rule?
I have, yeah.
So like I go back to that a lot, and I think sailing follows that very well. I don't think I've hit 10,000 hours yet, to be honest with you, because that's actually like a really long time. Like when you really do the math on that, it takes long time. Maybe years. I've spent that many hours like on the water sailing, but not like learning sailing, like trying to get better at it, So, and I believe in that. Like if you do 10,000 hours on pretty much anything, you'll be an expert. You'll be ridiculously good at it.
So as good as you are, there's still room to improve.
Oh yeah, I think so. I think I'm definitely not the best. I mean, I know a lot of guys who are better than me.
Yeah.
And sailing's an interesting sport too, because it is a physical and a mental sport. Very much 50-50, and
especially match racing.
Yeah, exactly. And there's some older guys who, like when you get into a type of boat that doesn't require the physical stuff, they'll kick your butt. They're like 70, whatever. They'll kick your butt. It doesn't matter. They'll beat you because they're smarter than you, and the boat handling and the physical stuff doesn't matter. But then you can also go down into like a smaller boat and be, you can beat up an older guy because they can't keep up with the physical aspect of it. So it's kind of interesting in that aspect,
Yeah. Being a professional athlete, are there any other sailors that inspired you with your endeavors?
Yeah, so the one person I always think about, and it kind of goes back to what I was just saying about like the age not mattering and like you can kind of like be pretty good at about whenever, is this guy Nick Scandone. And Nick Scandone was a Paralympic sailor. He was growing up. I mean, he got Lou Gehrig's disease at one point in his life. I think he was in his 20s and deteriorated from there. But before he was a sailor on the Olympic track, all that stuff. One of the best in the world, qualified for one of the Olympics that we boycotted back in the 80s. So I don't think he ended up going, but he did qualify. And then he was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease and took some time off the sport. But he was truly one of the best ever at sailing. Like in the country, in the world, he won the world championships of the boat he qualified for the Olympics in. So he was kind of a shoo-in to win the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then that all happened. But then he got to come back. It took a while, but he got into Paralympic sailing. And in 2008, he went and sailed at the Paralympics in China. And he won every single race by like 15 minutes. By like nobody could see him. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Like he destroyed everybody. And that was just so cool to me because like it doesn't, sailing is such a cool sport. It doesn't matter what's happened to you.
Yeah.
You can dominate it. Like if it's your thing and you study it and you do good at it, you can dominate it. And he's always been like such like a, I've always kind of tear up a little bit when I think about him too, because he passed away maybe 4 or 5 years ago now.
Such an inspiration, huh?
Yeah. But it was pretty cool. I got to hold the gold medal that he won and take a picture with him when I was younger. Yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah.
He was different. Yeah, he was like the best sailor ever. And he was super humble too. And like I try to be a lot like him and like never brag because like I never heard him brag once, but he was the best. Like he won when he was like doing all the regular sailing, all the big names you hear now like Dave Ullman. Like I don't know, that's the one I'm like right now because they used to race against each other, but he was better. He beat him all the time. Like when they were younger, So that's pretty cool to see. And Dave Ullman's like the best of the best of the best now.
That's really cool. So like he had a lot of the mental aspect of the sailing sport.
Oh, he was the smartest. He was really, really smart at it. Yeah. And so I just, he drove me to like, cause like you can do it. Anybody can do it. Anybody can be the best at it. So like, why wouldn't you try to be good at it if you have like the physical ability to do it all too? And like, I don't know, he was just a really important factor. I mean, that was right around that time when I was in high school too. When I was thinking about like, when I was kind of getting burnt out, and so that was like a huge driving factor too, to me carrying on. It was like, oh, he carried on, he loves it still, and it's like the one thing he wants to do, like it's worth it,
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. So going back to what you were saying about like doesn't matter what age you started as long as you put the hours in. That's probably what he was doing. He probably put a lot of hours to it, and that's what made him so good mentally at the sport. He could probably close his eyes and win a race, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he could think the whole thing through before it even started. I'm sure he had. His name was on so many trophies that I've looked at growing up. Like, it's ridiculous. So yeah, he had the hours for sure. Yeah. Like, he won everything from the time he was a junior, like in Little Sabbats and stuff. He was winning back then and winning like all the way through. Those are the guys, I guess, to be like truly the best of the best at sailing. Usually you see people who start pretty young. Yeah. But I mean, you also see, for instance, like we had a college sailor of the year, or runner up for college sailor of the year. So the second best sailor in college my senior year. He did sail before college, but not really. He had dabbled in it, done summer programs like that in high school even. Yeah. He didn't even do any sailing before high school. Did like his high school team his senior year, enjoyed it. And so when he went to college, he decided to get as good as he could at it. And he was a runner-up for college sailor of the year behind an Olympian. Wow. So like after just 4 years, 4
years, yeah. So on that point, what advice would you give student athletes with or without like the athletic experience of their sport? Like if I knew nothing about sailing and wanted to sail in college, what advice would you give to someone in my position or someone who is a good sailor and is kind of getting burnt out, like you were saying, and is debating whether they want to sail in college?
Yeah, I think it can be kind of tricky because to get really, really good at something, you can't just practice it. You have to practice it right. That's a really important thing, Yeah. So I'd say the first and most important thing is to find a coach. Yeah. Right? That's the first thing anybody should do, is have somebody who's going to like point them in the right direction, tell them to do the right things, and stuff like that. And then once you've done that, if you put more hours in than the person next to you, you're going to get better than them. So that's what you should do. But you got to make sure and practice right. That's another thing I really believe, is if you're going to go out and you're just going to like half-ass something and like go out there and go through the motions, it's not worth going through the motions. You have to get better from it, So you have to be trying something new or improving, like making something faster, doing something quicker, getting a little bit better at something every time. So make sure if you want to get better at something, like have that as your goal every time you go out. Not just like when you're at home, like thinking about it, like I want to get better, so I'm going to go and sail. It's like while you're sailing or while you're doing any sport, you got to be getting better. And that means having a good coach who can point you in the right direction. You can't just be like going out willy-nillying it. Yeah. Like you have to have somebody who points you in the right direction. But once you start to get it, you can take a lot of time off from that coach. Like if you like spend some time with them, they get you like all of your base level stuff. And now they're like, okay, now you just need repetitions. Then that's when you go and you do it on yourself, on your own. You do it 7 days a week, 8 hours a day, however much you can, and that's how quickly you'll get better, right?
And would you say passion drives that want and need to get better?
Absolutely, yeah. You have to want it. Like, you wouldn't just want to be doing something for nothing, right? You got to have like an end goal in mind. And for me, for a long time, that was the America's Cup. I mean, that's kind of like it's a little bit of a sore point for me because they switched to from monohulls to multi-hulls. And for me, I was really heavily into the monohull style of sailing, right? Which is super different from it's not even the same game. Like it's totally different. And I was like the best in the country at the one, and then it changed to a different style entirely. And so that my motivation was like for match racing, and then I went over into team racing and like started doing other things in sailing, But for like that period, I had a goal. I had something I wanted to get. I wanted to be on an American team for the America's Cup, and that was my goal. And I did apply for one, and I tried to kind of do it a little bit with the catamaran stuff and the hydrofoiling stuff, but it was just a little bit out of my wheelhouse, and so that was tough for me. But I would say make sure you have a goal. Yeah. Right? You want an end point, something to like get to, right? You don't want to just be like getting better at something. And for a lot of the kids that I coach, it's getting into college specifically. Like if you get really good at a sport, it helps you get into a better college, right? Any sport. And sailing, believe it or not, is like a little sneaky one that like gets you into a lot of really good schools that not a lot of people know about. So.
And how could you tell you were passionate about sailing?
It was when I started asking my parents to take me to go. Because it used to be like my dad's like, okay, you're going sailing this weekend. I'd be like, okay, like whatever, like you're taking me, like doing all that stuff, And then like the first time, I think I must have been 12 or 13. Like this was a little bit before I got into high school sailing, but kind of before I started to get burnt out as well. It was like a windy day, and one of my buddies was like, oh, it's pretty windy. Like, you think you want to go sailing? And I was like, why not? I've got a laser. Like, let's go and do it. I
Yeah.
asked my parents. I'm like, let's go do sailing or whatever. And they took me down. I rigged up my boat. I went out. It was super windy, like Santa Ana winds day,
Yeah.
like crazy like that. And me and my buddy went blast reaching, like the fastest I'd ever really gone in a boat up to that point, like a sailboat. Like by myself, we flipped over. We like got in like trouble a couple of times.
Was that the day you got pulled over by the cops for going too fast in the laser?
No, that wasn't actually. That was during a race. That one time that happened. But this time there was like nobody out there because it was stormy. It was like a Monday afternoon or something like that after school. And we just went reached around. We were out there for like 3 hours. Had no plan on being out there that long. Came back in, showered, went home, and it was like the best day ever. And I was like, oh, I could do that every day.
Yeah.
And like that was like a fun aspect of it. But then there's also like the competition, like it's hard because that was the fun aspect that got me back into it. And then the competition kept me in it.
Really?
So it was like, I like to win and I like to be better or worse, like to like prove yourself against somebody. And I think a lot of people do, some people don't, but I think it's fun to prove yourself against other people. And that's what like kept me in it, I think after. Yeah.
Being a sailor myself, I know what you mean where it's like, it's just so fun being out there, but like, how do you surpass like the stress of a regatta? Because I know it can be stressful sometimes competing against other people that are just as good as you and better than you. Yeah,
that is true. And the mentality I've always had going into any regatta is like, this same regatta exists next year.
Yeah.
I can come back and sail this again.
That's actually really good insight.
Like if I'm starting to do poorly, I should use it as a learning experience, right? Like not like beat myself up about it. It's like I'm going to come back next year and I'm going to win again. And for instance, like Gov Cup was one of those regattas. I sailed that regatta 5 or 6, I can't even remember, so many times. And it's an age limited regatta, so I did actually have a limit to the number that I could sail those, but I didn't end up sailing my last year because I won the year before. So I was kind of like, okay, I made it. Like it's good, I can take that year off. But like, sorry, where were we going with that?
Oh, I was just keep talking. I don't know.
Just
so with passion.
The passion.
I was like the stress of
the
competing.
stress. Yeah. So like that was always a really stressful regatta for me too, because like that was my home event. Like that was the one I was essentially trying to get good at match racing to win because they hadn't won in so long. But like I had an extra year. I could always go back and do it again. And so I would take pieces. I'm like, oh, I lost that race to that guy, but I know I'm going to sail him against him next year because he's coming back. I got to beat him still. Yeah. And so I would learn from that and be like, okay, I can beat him that way.
Was that the guy from England, the team England?
Harry Price. He was from Australia.
Oh, okay.
But he was the number one in the world just outright the year that I won. And so he was.
And you beat him. Wow, that must have been an accomplishment. Like you probably.
It was a really hard year, and luckily I didn't have to go head to head against him in the final. I had to go against another guy who beat him in like a separate piece of it. But that was, he was like my nemesis for the longest time. I couldn't beat him at like anything, and then I kept learning.
Put more hours in.
I figured out, like, just to get kind of technical for a second, on the downwinds, he was getting me every time. And so we just worked on downwinds like for like 2 weeks leading up to the last Gov Cup. Got super fast at all of that section of the race. And then he finally couldn't catch us because I would always be ahead of him upwind, beat him in the pre-starts. Like I was really good at pre-starting, and then he'd catch me every time. And like he was the only person who would ever catch me, and we like had to figure out how he did his maneuvering and stuff to try and stay in front of him.
So the stress drove you to practice your weaknesses and get really good at your weaknesses.
And I tried to figure it out, like, because you can always go back. Like there are certain age-limited things, but the big things, at least in sailing, like are open. You can sail them when you're 70. You can sail them when you're 15. It doesn't matter, So like that's always like that's a really good thing about sailing. You can always come back. You can always learn from this year and come back the next year. And I'm sure there's a lot of sports that are like that, especially like, especially at the adult level, that you can feel that way about.
And you must have been the king of the club, being the first Team USA to win the Gov Cup in how many years?
Well, not the first Team USA, but like the home yacht club representative, because it was held at our. Basically, an overview of the Gov Cup is it's pretty much the youth national championship. Or world championship, for match racing. It's not called that, but it's pretty much the hardest one around, and everybody pretty much accepts it as that. And it's hosted here in Newport Beach at Balboa Yacht Club. And I'm a member at Balboa Yacht Club and won it for them. And before then, it had been 37 years since a home yacht club member had won it. And they run it every year. And a lot of Australian Kiwi teams started to win. After that in that 37-year period, and not a lot of American teams were winning, but some Americans have won in there for sure. Yeah.
But no, you're the first one from the club that actually hosts it.
From the home yacht club, and that was a huge driving factor.
Oh yeah. I remember going to the club and seeing your pictures on the wall right in front of the bar.
No, it's cool. It's really nice, and everybody there is really nice about it. And they always helped us like beforehand. Like they knew it was like, it was a 6-year thing at least to win Gov Cup.
Yeah.
And they were there for the whole time. Like they were giving us, helping us with funding to go travel to Australia, New Zealand, do all these big regattas. They're like getting us boats, like helping us do all that stuff. And so like, the yacht club did it for us. And so we were happy to do it for them. You know what I mean? Like
That's
it was really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And what can you tell us about the position you were in for the Gov Cup race?
What do you mean position?
Like you were skippering, right?
Right. So yeah, the driver of the boat. Yeah. So I drive the boat. That's my job. So there's a lot of jobs on a sailboat. I mean, and it's not just the driver, and all the parts are, just equally as important.
Everyone has to work together. You must have to have pretty good team chemistry for that to work out, huh?
Yeah, I think a lot of the reason we won Gov Cup actually was because I sailed with the same 2 guys for 6 straight, or however many. Yeah, I think we did 6 times. It was the same guys too, and we would practice like for like a month straight right before hard.
Right.
And we'd practice intermittently throughout the year when we could. Sometimes we were at college, stuff like that. But whenever we could, we would practice hard, the 3 of us, and we would do some like regattas during the year and stuff like that. And that's a huge reason that we won, actually. Our boat handling, which is like the control over the boat, which is like entirely dependent on how well you know your teammates and how much you've practiced with them.
Trust them, too.
And trust them, like something's going to happen right when it's supposed to happen. And that's what we had. We never had a mistake. Like the year we won, we had 0 mistakes in that category. And everybody else had mistakes in that category. Yeah.
You probably you might have already answered this question, but what is something you're especially proud of in your career? Would it be the Gov Cup, or is there anything else that comes to mind?
Winning team racing nationals in college was actually, because that's truly, Gov Cup was really hard, but the team racing nationals in college is considered one of the hardest things to win in all of sailing. Right. Because the Americans are the best at team racing. The Americans aren't the best at match racing. The Australians and the Kiwis are better than us, generally speaking. But we're the best at team racing, so it's like in college is the highest level of team racing. Like they're practicing every day.
You got to be the best of the best.
It's constant, exactly. So that's truly like the hardest thing I think to win. And to be fair, I had an Olympian on my team. It's not just one person; it's 3 drivers in 3 separate boats, all working together to have a combined score to win. And I had an Olympian on my team, and I had another guy who was also extremely, extremely good. He was runner-up for College Sailor of the Year his senior year as well. So I mean, it wasn't just me alone there, but that was a really, really cool thing to win. And that was the hardest thing I think I've ever won. Yeah.
And you raced for University of Charleston?
College of Charleston.
College of Charleston.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think it might technically be a university now, but they still call themselves College of Charleston. Yeah, it's a little strange, but yeah.
Cool. That's awesome. Well, Christophe, thank you so much for being on the show. You've brought a lot of great insight to our viewers. Thank you for everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you on our next episode.
No, thank you for having me.
Of course.